Please. And I'll invite Mike Davidson to open the meeting. Mike.
Ka tukuna te karakia. Whakatakte hau ki te uru, whakatakte hau ki te tonga. Ki mā kina ki te uta, ki mā tara ki tai. E he aki ana te atakura. Hei tio, hei huka, hei hohu. Tihei moriora.
Kia ora. Thank you. So good morning and welcome to our meeting. We'll start with item 1, apologies. I've got an apology from the Mayor for an early departure. I've got an apology from Tim Scanderett for a late arrival and an early departure from Jimmy Chen. So I'm happy to move those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Sam, all those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Major declared an interest in item 13 and Councillor Scanderett declared an interest in item 14. Are there any further interests that need to be declared? If anything becomes apparent as we move through the meeting, please make it known at that time and we'll note those declarations of interest, or they are already noted, so thank you for that. So now we move to item 3, confirmation of previous minutes, I'll take items 3 and item 16 together, which is the open and public excluded minutes, which I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Jake. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Public forum, item 4. There are no public forum presentations this morning. Deputations by appointment, there are no deputations this morning. And item 6, there are no petitions. So that takes us very neatly to item 7, the capital project performance report. So Ruth, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. And I'd invite you to make any introductory remarks and then we'll move to questions.
Thank you. Good morning. So this is our first capital project performance report for this financial year. So the data is captured as of the 20th of July 2020. On page 21, you'll see that the financial year spend at the end of July was 6 million. This is against a current financial year budget of 501. So spend is always quite low in July, as June is a double month of spend, which reflects the work that was completed in June. On page 24, COVID-19 cost impacts. So as per last month, our contractor claims have remained static at a total value of 6 million. So many of them are still undergoing assessment. They're in negotiation. As of 20th of July, we'd settled 50% of those. So this month, we were able to provide you with a list of COVID-related claims that have been settled. You will get an updated list of that next month, but we do expect the majority of claims to be settled by that time. There will be a couple of claims outstanding that may take a couple of extra months to resolve. You will receive at this committee the final settled values once we've completed those negotiations. Page 26, carry forward and bring backs. So our 501 million budget this financial year does include 94 million worth of projects that were carried forward from last financial year. The details on those projects are in Di's report, which you'll receive later on in today's agenda. As of 20th of July, based on project manager forecasts, we are forecasting at the moment a net carry forward from this year of minus 52 million. So what that is a bring back of 52 million. It's a common scenario at the beginning of a financial year to see a bring back. There are quite a number of projects in construction. We've got 400 at the moment, and we've just set our annual plan budgets. So we also are trying to focus on early planning of projects at this time of the year to allow for unforeseen delays or issues of those projects in construction. So our focus this financial year is to manage bringbacks and carry forwards so that we have a net zero carry forward for financial year 21. So page 29, our current project status, that has remained relatively static from previous month. So there were a number of projects reported in those greater than $1 million value that were read. We have addressed them during July and are no longer an exception. What you will see in future capital project performance reports will be a separate attachment similar to the watchlist one and the MCR one that will provide detailed progress updates on our externally funded projects. So our water projects, our shovel-ready projects and our CRAF funded projects among them. On page 33, our watchlist report. This has been revised for financial year 21 after last committee. The status has remained static from previously reported. The timing of the last committee, the submission of this report has meant St Albans Community Centre will form part of next watchlist report. But by way of verbal update, St Albans is on track for delivery in February 21, with an opening still to be advised in collaboration with the St Albans Residents Association. So given the external shovel-ready funding that's been received to deliver on the coastal pathway, that is earlier than we had originally planned to deliver it. So that will be on future watchlist reports. You'll see that on the watchlist report next month. The major cycleways report, you'll see now that the shovel-ready projects have been identified within that report. The red time indicators that you see on those specific projects are historic, and they were in relation to funding delays. Obviously, that has been resolved. So once we've worked out our delivery program for those projects, we will re-baseline those dates to reflect that delivery program. Those red indicators will drop off. And then finally, the closeout report. So each month you receive a project closeout report. We've come to the end of our existing list. And so we are asking just for confirmation from you around the next 6 projects where you will receive those closeout reports for the next 6 months. I'll now take any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for including the list of the shovel-ready projects in this report as well, and noting that this is where we'll get the progress reporting on those projects as well. Now, just coming back to your comments on Coastal Pathway, that will form part of the watch list in future. Do we need to pass any resolution, or that will just happen as a matter of course?
It'll just happen as a matter of course.
It'll just happen. Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. All right, any further questions? Sam?
Just a quick one. Thanks, Ruth. It's a really useful report. In terms of the CapEx to date, like I appreciate this is in July, but do we have a sense on where that's going or how much has been spent?
So we have spent what we forecast for July and August. It will ramp up from now on as we start to move into construction on those 400 projects. So at the moment, we're still forecasting to deliver on the 501.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Thank you. Yanni?
Thank you for the update. The COVID-19 costs and the claims, are we going to get any sort of special briefing on like the legal aspects of that? Because I'm just not quite sure why we're paying out as a council, and also the ones that you've settled. Why do we not have values to those? Like in there, you've said it's 6 million.
Yes.
Of claims that have been received, but I don't have any sense of how much it's costing us in terms of liability, in terms of the ones that have been settled. So
Yeah, so we wouldn't want to provide, for commercial sensitive reasons, the actual dollar value at this stage until
Right.
we've actually resolved all of them. But you will receive that once they have been settled and negotiations are complete.
are we likely to have any sort of understanding about why council's liable?
That's a legal question. Ian was here before. Dave, do you know?
We can bring that back to you. We've got legal looks over all of those claims. Basically, under the contracts, there are force majeure clauses and reasons why for establishment, disestablishment, for all that sort of thing. There are things that we are liable for, as is NZTA and all the rest of it. So basically, we are making sure that any claims that we do get are absolutely rigorously looked at and reduced as low as we possibly can. And as Ruth says, because we're still in negotiations, we don't want any individual figures out there at this point in time.
Do you think it would have made a difference of us applying for the government subsidy if we'd known that we would have incurred these additional costs?
We couldn't apply for the government subsidy on those individual projects. The contractors could, and I presume they had. However, we have got a legal binding document that says this, and that's why some of the negotiations have been, I think we did put up something at one stage, and there was quite a lot of difference between what they claimed and what we thought they were eligible, and that all comes into that equation.
Okay. And just, obviously this would be happening across the country, so we're talking to our partner councils around a sort of common...
We certainly are, and we're certainly, NZTA, MB have put out a lot of guidelines on assessing those, and we are absolutely adhering to that advice that's been given to.
Cool. And just the second wave, like, is there any like suggestion with the level 2 that there's going to be additional?
If you have a look at the contracts that we've let after, we have actually priced in if there is a second wave. Now, obviously, contracts let before the first wave don't have those clauses in, but we have identified potential additional costs if we had a second wave in contracts that have been let since the first wave, if that makes sense. So that we actually do know and have that ability to accept or not accept a tender based on those figures.
Right.
In terms of alert level 2, Yanni, I have talked to the delivery unit owners, and at the moment there hasn't been any variations or even concern relating to variations in terms of the restrictions with level 2.
Which is good. And then I guess just the obviously we've got a list of the sort of smaller ones, but the big ones, which are the, you know, obviously, well, the big one is the Metro Sports. Is that being handled separately, is it?
Yeah,
Metro Sports is not one of our contracts, so it's actually been done by Otakaru.
And but it's got no liability back to us in terms of cost.
no, and we don't have visibility of the claim either.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Regarding to those shovel-ready program on the watch list, particularly regarding to the Horseway Junction Road extension. Here you mentioned the risk. One risk is a Kiwi Rail program of works. I just want to know whether the key issue is some of the long weight material and purchase from overseas, long waiting or not.
The New Zealand legislation puts the railway line actually has precedent over roads, and so they are the dictators of work that occurs on their activity. Where we've come up to agreement, we've finally got the design done, but they are very specific on the equipment that they use, and it's that's been delivered. Apparently there's a worldwide demand, and that's a 9-month delivery time on specific equipment that they want to deal with that crossing. At the same time, we have actually put one of our project managers on as a special Kiwi Rail liaison person to keep track of that. And he used to work for Kiwi Rail, so knows their system. And we're fortunate enough, well, no, we were sad to lose a project manager, but he has gone to Kiwi Rail, so they know our perspective. So the communication's going better. But it's just, as we've already said, there's a 9-month delay on some of the specialist equipment coming in that Kiwi Rail says that's the only equipment they'll use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, Ruth, just on the coastal pathway, given I think it'll be the city's #1 attraction, it's an early call, I know, but I think I'll be right. What's the opening date now?
So at the moment we're still working through the delivery plan. We don't have an opening date.
A ballpark?
Tuesday.
I
Tuesday. It will be open
yeah.
1 to...
I did talk to Transport yesterday.
sorry,
They're
to
thinking
be-
around December 23.
December 23.
Appreciate we've got to put resource consents in. We are fast tracking the design so we can put those resource consents in, and we are working with all the interested parties or stakeholders that we think are interested, but that will not stop potentially things coming out of the woodwork that we don't know. It is a very sensitive environment because it will potentially overhang or interfere with the coastal environment. And secondly, we've got a whole pile of issues around, how do we allow for climate change, etc., etc. So the resilience of it. But we are working on that. We are fast tracking all that work.
So we look forward to being updated when you've got further details.
2023
Excellent.
climate change would have kicked in. Just so you know, the Empire State Building was about 100 days just for the build.
Excellent, but we won't be building the Empire State Building there. I'm not sure we would want to, but yeah.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Pauline.
and that's going there. Just one on page 31, and it's about the Christchurch wastewater treatment plant, which is a read, and it's contractual issues to be resolved with the contract. How's it going? Because that's a fairly major piece of kit we've got out there.
It's just ongoing negotiations with the contractor, which we'll just have to resolve it with time. It's basically a fraught relationship with them understanding how the detail on the plan versus being a competent builder needing to be able to interpret what's on the plan. So it's achieving that balance.
Right, so is that more related to the building
Yes.
rather than the operation side of the plant?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. Dave, this is probably you again. With this coastal pathway, it has to be cantilevered, does it?
No, I believe the team's looking at a variety of different options about digging back the bank on the other side, but there's a couple of private properties in the way. They're looking at a variety of different solutions to try. So it probably will not. I don't think we would ever get permission to pile it. Not sure we want to pile it after the incident that we're having at the moment with the we're having private contractor. So we are working through what that design solution looks like.
Sorry, you can't pile it, or like a wharf.
We think we're very unlikely to get in that area permission to pile it. But we are looking through all those design solutions, and they're coming through with various options. So I'm not saying it's definitely going to be cantilever, but it's one of the options. We're also looking at options of cutting back. Obviously, we own quite a bit of the other side at the moment, or not at the moment, forever probably.
Is this on the bend, so to speak?
Correct, yeah. But then there's a couple of private properties further back which I can't dig into, or I'd have to buy. They'll get their special. It's reasonably. It's got a number of issues which we are working through. We've got issues around that the platform. We've got issues around the where the yacht club is. We've got apparently an old gun embankment in there, and I've biked over there and I've never seen it before. But there's an historic gun embankment somewhere, and there is also the tram bus station, which is a heritage. Preservation. So we've got a whole range of issues that we have to work through to look at all those solutions.
Presumably this will be subject to public consultation and decision making at some point.
Correct.
Once you've done all of that work.
The concept has been all approved and done. It's actually getting into the nitty gritty of the detail of actually how that gets delivered. There's a couple of things like a secondary stormwater flow paths that we have to preserve as well, stop the people flooding there. There's a wide range of issues that they're taking on board, but we are fast-tracking all those issues so we have a comprehensive solution that we can put to the market as soon as we possibly can.
All right, thank you. Yanni, do you have something further?
Did you want questions on the watch list projects as well?
Yeah, this would be the time for that.
Oh, okay. So the wastewater mains renewal for Chewham Street Brick Barrel, I see now that the new date's February 21. Increasingly concerned that project's becoming like a year, almost, not quite a year overdue. And I just wanted to kind of understand how we're communicating to the local businesses in the area, what impact it's having on them, and if there's any thought to what we can do to alleviate any concerns.
John may be able to answer, but I've been on site a number of times and we have got a very comprehensive communication with the owners of the properties alongside, and we're making sure that we don't impinge their access as much as we possibly can. Obviously, again, if you go down on site, it's a very complex little project because it's removing the old 120-year-old brick barrels and replacing them with a specially made manufactured lined pipe that we believe will give us another 120 years, or the city. We might not be around to see the end of that pipe. Some of us might, but And so, but we are working and keeping, my understanding, them very informed. And when I've been down on site and talked to the locals, I've had no issues about them not feeling that they haven't been informed.
Right.
It has been February 21 for a while now, so we haven't delayed it any further.
Right.
And they're still forecasting to deliver on that date. The reason that it's still red is because we don't necessarily need to re-baseline every single date, just because it goes over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're still expecting Feb 21. Would they have a shutdown over Christmas?
Pass, I'd have to ask the project manager.
Yes, they do.
Okay. And I mean, I think this would be one good to flag as one of the closeout reports, because I mean, just trying to understand why the assessment didn't pick up from this stuff. There might be some really easy answers, but I think given the fact that it's taking so long.
We'll make a note of that, and that'll come up in the next list, because the closeout reports we're talking about for the next 6 months, this one doesn't close until after that, so it'll be a closeout report probably for the middle of next year.
If we can take a note of that as one to suggest for the next list, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to thank you for putting Lancaster Park Enabling Works on, but I wonder if that title's sort of a little bit not quite the right title. So I think it's good to have project visibility of that, but it's more than just the enabling works. I think we were keen to just track the kind of redevelopment as well.
I think we need to say enabling works for now, because the Lancaster Park redevelopment needs to end up in the LTP first. So the first part is the enabling works.
Okay.
And then once we've completed the enabling works, we'll continue to track that as the redevelopment project. Right. It's a separate project.
I think we've put it into the annual plan now, so it's a specific annual plan project. And yeah, I mean, it's getting quite confusing.
There isn't any funding for the redevelopment portion of the project in this year's plan. It's the enabling works.
But as long as it's the spirit of Yanni's question is well understood, and as long as we can pick that up in a meaningful way to achieve what Yanni's wanting to achieve, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think there's just confusion over the amount that was put on for demolition, and then that was for the 3 million was going to be for the development of the spatial plan elements, but now that's got stuck into probably still into the demolition phase. So, but that's cool. I think, okay, when it comes back we can talk about that.
As long as we've got the appropriate level of oversight through the watch list, I think we're fine, and exactly what we call each part of the project, as long as we've got oversight of the whole delivery from beginning to end, and if that's across 2 projects rather than 1, as long as we've got the appropriate oversight, that's the important thing.
So my understanding is the stage 2 would be due for, I think they were aiming for winter sports in 2022. So.
Yeah, and what we've heard is that will be a LTP project rather than a current year project. Obviously, we'll pick that up as part of the LTP development.
Thanks.
All right, are there any further questions on this report? Mike.
Thank you. Probably a bit for Dave as well. Just a question around the Northern Line cycleway, and obviously now that we've got the shovel ready money for that, it'll bring it all forward. But obviously a component of that was to do a lot of the upgrades to the rail crossings along that route, which I think is actually a really important part of this whole project, and it's probably the most important part right this moment because of the risk that some of those crossings currently have because of increased traffic volumes. And I'm just wondering if we could separate the rail crossing component out slightly in this program, just so we can see the progress of that, because I think it's actually almost more important than actually completing that cycleway itself out to Belfast. So.
We could look at it. It's probably identified in the milestones and detailed program that's sitting in MS project, which we don't normally do. But look, I can go away and talk to the project manager and see where that is. We have done that on most of our projects, just in case there's delays in the Kiwi Rail stuff, and we could do everything up to either side of it. So look, I'd have to talk to the project manager. It's
just that we've got 2 different types down there. We've got the corridor, and then we've got the level crossings.
Correct.
And
I think
when
they
you
are
look at
separated.
but there's creating a risk at the moment. It's the level crossings, especially if you look at Langdons Road and Harewood Road. And I think we need to try and push them as quickly as possible. If we actually separate it from just the actual corridor itself, we may be able to keep a closer eye on it.
Yep.
Yep, so given that Mike's raised that as a risk, if we can have that highlighted in future reports, that would be great.
I think in the extra attachment for shovel-ready projects, we can provide some update commentary around that.
Yeah, and clearly it's an area of particular focus. Great. No further questions. We've got a set of recommendations in front of us, which I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Jimmy Chen. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now moving to item 8, the major facilities elected member update. So Alistair, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. Is there any commentary that you'd like to provide on this report before we move to questions?
No, just take it as read, I think.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the report. Are there any questions on any of these major facilities projects? Yanni?
Yeah. When is the old chambers supposed to open?
The OMC's currently, we're still negotiating with a supplier at the moment, but we've just received the concept designs for the future use of that building, which are under review by the heritage team at the moment. There's an expectation that we'll put a paper up in October to council with those concepts and the proposal from the supplier that we're negotiating with.
So all going kind of well.
Yep.
When would we expect to kind of have it repaired, restored, returned
We'd have to see.
use?
We haven't, so they've put up a concept which gives us a indicative methodology, but I'd really need to see their program to understand when they're actually going to deliver that. So, but the intention is in the next 2.5 years, basically. So,
right.
Yep.
Okay.
So it's good to see that we're on target with that. The report indicates that report is due first week of September. Well, here we are right at the beginning of September and we're hearing that we've got that, which is great. I mean, I think there's a clear message in the spirit of Yanni's question, which is that we want to see progress here as soon as we possibly can. I'd asked for this report to be updated rather than just detailing the status quo, how we're keeping the building safe and intact in the meantime. I'd asked for it to be updated with the future view, and we've got that here for the first time. This will be the way that we'll continue to get that reported back on a cyclical basis, but obviously if there's a need for council decision making and if there's anything we can do to keep this moving at pace, we'll be highly motivated to do that.
Right. And can I just ask about Metro Sports? So we still have project delivery Q2 2022?
Yep.
And obviously just trying to understand whether we're still on track for that.
From what we do from our site visits as well, we're seeing we've seen a gradual pickup in pace of productivity across the site, and how we know that is through the invoicing to council for payments, and Mark Noonan is our project director looking after that particular project, and we've struggled to meet those forecasts for quite a while, and this month their invoice has been in excess of another $500,000 above what they expected. So you can see that productivity has kicked in post-COVID, and I think you're starting to see a lot more steel erection on site as well, which is a good sign that they're picking up the pace too.
So the supply chain issues that we previously have been briefed on, have they been resolved?
We're not sure. We're not clear on everything because they're still resolving those. There would have been quite a detailed set of issues that they've had, and Otakara are dealing with that closely. Mark is aware of the status, but we've not seen an end to that just yet.
Okay.
And again, just reaffirming that, the delay is something that we'd have to consider, but the cost is not something we'd have to consider because we're fixed on our funding.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. And my question is on the square and surrounds.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, because as we know, concentrating on the south-east corner as well as first, and the fact that the Distinction Hotel is in COVID isolation or quarantine, is that going to have an effect or delay on the works there? Because we don't know how long it's going to be there.
Well, so obviously we're keeping in touch with MB and Defence Force as well because they're managing the process. So at the minute that's fixed till December, and that doesn't halt our current going to market. So we've got a design that's well advanced. We're currently reviewing that in order to release it to market, and we expect to be evaluating just prior to that date. But at the moment, we're with interest following what they're actually doing with the Distinction at the moment. So it may halt what we do, but we are cognizant of where they're at the moment. So.
That's a good worry, isn't it? So if that does continue on, does that got the outdoor exercise?
It will delay the
So
delivery.
will we reprioritise another sector?
Yeah, well, we're working in the report I've given you that we're working on stages 3 and 4 as well at the moment in order to ensure that we've got alternates.
Yeah.
But with the post-COVID environment, the developers in the area are all feeling the pain. So there's a lot of fluctuation in change, and and some of the developers are pulling away from some of the developments in those areas. So Aotea, for instance, is different again. So yeah, there is a bit of fluctuation at the moment, but we're aware of it and we're monitoring it. So.
Tricky. And just on that, the design, if you just jog my memory, you know the raised area of concrete with the trees in it?
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be removed or does that stay?
Off the top of my head, I think it's still it's remaining at the moment, but with some slight changes, some amendments. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy.
One question, okay, thank you for answering for two the questions regarding the Homeby Library Customer Service Software Leisure Center. But just one additional question I just look at. Under the current update, you emphasize the concept design complete and the preliminary design is underway. So I have been confused. My thought, is a preliminary design first, concept design and detailed design.
No, it's concept, preliminary, develop, detail.
Detail, am I right?
No, it goes concept,
Yeah.
preliminary, developed, detailed.
Okay.
That's the
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
All right, thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, just got a couple of questions around the Performing Arts Precinct.
Yep.
What's that? Firstly, I saw in the paper on Tuesday or on stuff online that the Armour Street building was being pulled down.
Ken's cameras, yeah.
Yeah, where Ken's cameras in the bank and stuff was. So that was a little bit of a surprise because I didn't know they'd finally finalised the sale of that. And why was that not just repurposed into a black box theatre? I know it was derelict, but it didn't appear to be dangerous.
It's been, the structure is, quite a while ago we requested DEEs for the building.
Right.
Yep. And what we found is that the status of the structure itself is beyond repair. And you wouldn't want to spend the money repairing something that is not basically repairable. So the deal that was struck between Atarakaro and the insurer was about demolishing the building and clearing the site so that we could do what we wanted to do with the site as part and parcel of the precinct development.
Right, so what was structurally wrong with it? Because it's just tilt slab sides.
Yeah, I couldn't
with the
tell you
lightweight
the exact
roof.
details, but I can attain the information and provide it to you if that's what you want
Right.
to hear.
Right, yeah, it's surprising because there's no clear cracking or anything in the...
If an engineer tells you that the structure is beyond repair, then you've got to take that engineer's advice, really.
Okay, and then the other one is just around this. It says here a key milestone was achieved in the agreement of the development of the site. So what is, I mean, can you elaborate on that or not?
On the development agreement itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the development agreement is the achievement, the milestone, which is the agreement between Christchurch City Council and the Court Theatre in order to deliver the Court Theatre on the site.
So that's changed over time because originally, and I know this is going to come in about 8 years late, but originally we were giving the 30-odd million to Court Theatre. They were delivering because obviously they have a lot of people that like helping the court. No one seems to like helping the council for free, but the court's a lot different. And they were going to deliver the project, but now that's not the case. And why did that happen?
Well, in my tenure at council, I've always been delivering the Court Theatre. I've never had anyone tell me that the Court Theatre were being given $30 million and they were to deliver the Court Theatre.
What year did you start, Alison?
2016.
2016, right. So it must have been just before that, did it?
Been in a pre-existing business case that was an intention, but...
And was that a decision of council, do you know?
No, I couldn't tell you. I've only ever known the fact that we would be delivering the Court Theatre.
Right, because just talking to a former head of the Court Theatre, he didn't know of it ever being a decision of council, it just happened. So.
Court Theatre, and in the end the Court Theatre didn't want to deliver it.
Right.
There's a lot of risk associated with building projects like that. They're a key partner with us. They are part funding it, but the decision was made. The PSG that runs, which is a joint PSG between the council and Court Theatre, that decision was made, and it was endorsed by the Court Theatre Trust.
Right. Okay. So that was that ever a council decision, or it was just kind of agreed and then they were happy, council was happy, so they just moved on?
We have had previous reports through the council and previous briefings.
Brad, what I suggest you do is when you come to brief before Christmas, you just do a chronology of what, when and how
Decisions.
of the decisions, so that then people can have their
That'll be
memory
helpful.
reminded.
Yeah, thank you. I was on my sabbatical for part of that, so.
But recognising we're not relitigating, you've made decisions at some point in the past.
Was a negotiated sabbatical through an election process or something?
Yeah, I understand that.
All right, thank you. So thanks for answers to those questions. Are there any further questions on this report? All right, so we've got a set of recommendations in front of us. Sarah, you're happy to move. Pauline's happy to second. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. So now moving to item 9, the financial performance report. And Diane Brandish, if we can invite you to the table, please. Is Diane here? Diane, thank you. We're just moving to item 9, which I understand you're presenting, so if I could invite you to the table. Thank you. So if you'd like to make any introductory remarks, and then we'll move to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The information in this report has been flagged before, and there was one point that you did ask that I clarify, which was a 9.2 about why the COVID-19 is estimated at 32.7. The answer to that is, while we know what the deficit was for the year, we can only estimate the actual impact that COVID-19 had on it. So closing a stadium or a swimming pool, for example, we know the loss of revenue, but we don't know the entire amount is actually due to COVID-19 because people might not have gone anyway. So that's why it's an estimated figure, although the final deficit itself is final.
Yeah, so the number is definite,
Yes.
but attributing the number entirely to COVID has got to be an estimation.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification. Was there anything else you wanted to comment on the
I
report?
think the rest is self-explanatory, and there are people here if people have questions around the carry-forwards, just to confirm if the carry-forwards, like the OPEX carry-forwards, are not confirmed as they are, then that will reduce the deficit for last year. Any other changes would have to go forward to this year. And we have already, you as councillors have already approved the borrowing for the deficit as identified at 25.9. That was part of the annual plan.
Yep, so the recommendations in front of us are where we formally approve the carry forwards, which are detailed in attachments B and D.
Yes.
Yep, great, thank you. Sam, you're happy to move, okay. Are there any questions on this report? Yanni.
There was commentary around the DC rebate not being taken, and therefore requesting that we carry that forward. Why would we carry forward something that was time limited?
I believe we're still within the time frame, because if it was absolutely finalised as at December, June, we wouldn't have recommended that. But I believe other papers have come to council already. If not already recommending it, then we are still within the original time frame. I'm sorry, I don't know which it is, but if it was to finish at June, we wouldn't be recommending
So
it.
basically it's more a mechanical thing. We've got a policy that will pay the DCs whatever year that we've got a fixed quantum, and that just rolls over until it's exhausted.
Well, not necessarily, but there are people who have flagged they have undertaken work relying on it. The timing could be so that it wasn't they might have met within whatever the gates were, but not necessarily have reached the point where it could be paid, but have still undertaken the work in the expectation that it will be paid to them when they reach that point.
So that was the subject of a previous decision.
Yes.
What we've got here is the budget that reflects the effect of that decision on the numbers.
Yes.
All right, any further questions? All right, so Sam, you've moved. Do I have a seconder? James? So moved and seconded. Is there any debate? All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. So then moving to item 10, the update, the LTP 2021 update. Peter, welcome to the table. And noting the additional document on the hub, which I'm guessing, Peter, is the report that that'll be the substance of what you're speaking to this morning. So if you can maybe just take us through that, assuming it's been read, but if you can just take us through some of the detail, that would be excellent.
Sure. Good morning. Right, beginning with the executive summary, a lot of the LTP is still on track, but there are some things that are behind schedule. There's a complex series of reasons for that around COVID, Annual Plan 2.0 and others. But essentially the key parts that we're not able to put in front of you at this point are the activity budgets and to some extent the savings required. We also have a little bit of complexity around the capital program. We'd like to put in front of you the draft capital program with the savings options, the rates increase options clearly transposed across the top. So you can see what 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 would look like on the capital program. So that's the next step there. We have had a heads up from Audit New Zealand that they're going to be very focused on asset planning information and renewals. And we've also had a little internal heads up that we may need to look at some soft spots there. So that's an issue. And for those reasons, the plan has moved from green to amber. That doesn't mean that this stuff can't be brought back on track. It's just a flag so that you've got an early notice that we've got issues that we're dealing with. It isn't a terminal case. It's simply we're being open with you about where we're at. In terms of the things that are on track, the big stuff largely is the co-development process is in place. The strategic direction work and the central government authorities are well understood. The IS has been well received by both EAG and Council. The financial strategy, of course, took a hit from COVID and the lockdown. But now that we've got a lot of parameters established, that's moving forward. As I said, the operational savings and activity budgets are probably the chief stumbling block at this point. Activity plans are in front of you, but without that engine room of the numbers, I would think it's fair to say that process isn't where it should be. Asset plans have been completed, and it's just a matter of going back and looking at some of those soft spots that audit is going to be probing into, so that when we do talk to them about it, we're in the right space. Capital prioritisation, you've had a number of briefings from Carolyn, and as I said, it's now a matter of transposing the realities of the rates increase options across that program so that you can see just how tough some of those are going to be in terms of what the capital program will look like. Bearing in mind that there's a focus from Audit New Zealand both on the affordability of the program but also the deliverability of the program. That's a nationwide issue, that's not a Christchurch issue. Councils across New Zealand are struggling to deliver their capital programs, which means we're making promises as a sector that we're not living up to. And audit is coming in on that pretty hard. There's a briefing coming up later this month for you on how the stakeholder engagement will occur for the LTP. That's probably a rather distant goal at the moment. We've got to get through the mechanics of the budget and stuff first, but there's an interesting and breakthrough range of options there for us on engagement. The process review of the LTP is somewhat top heavy. There's a lot of oversight, and Audit New Zealand are coming in to formally begin that shortly. And of course the external advisory group has been meeting since March with about 15 or 16 meetings under its belt, and I understand they've briefed you on some of their findings in a preliminary way. So look, they're the strengths of the thing. and there's also some things in there that need some work, but that's the state of play as of today.
Thank you, Peter, for that. We'll move to questions next. Now, Dawn, did you have some comments as well?
Yes.
Yep.
To aid the discussion, and thank you, Peter, for the overview. I think the important thing to be saying to members, we are being very open and transparent on the journey of devising our LTP. We're trying something different. In doing that, we were never going to get it completely right, and we know we've hit some stumbling blocks. I'm not uncomfortable about that because we're aware of them. It doesn't mean that I'm ecstatically happy, and neither will my staff team be, and neither will you, but we are going through a journey to try and do this better. So in light of the areas that Peter has described, let me just touch on some of those for you. So in relation to the budgets, I am expecting the capital work to be completed in terms of the budget numbers by mid-September, so that we'll be in a position when we see the rest of the work done by finance and OPEX as well, which we're expecting by the end of September, that we'll have the budget position in the totality by the end of the month. I think that still puts us ahead of the game than where we were previous to LTPs. On the levels of service, which Peter didn't really touch on, I do think collectively, as governance and as the senior team, we do need to do more work on that. It still feels like some of the process of the past that the Mayor has described to me. And I do think we need to come together to work through really what could that look like, and give further guidance to heads of service, because I do think we want to reduce those numbers and be more focused and recognise managing those expectations. The challenge of bringing the levels of savings to give you choice, we are seeing the difficulty with that. We've seen first 4 activity plans. We are not there. Some saving material in there, but nowhere near enough. And having reflected on that, I've discussed with my colleagues the need for utilisation data and geography data, which I think will help us look at the overall strategic picture, because I think you need to see that to help you make more detailed decisions and guidance as we go through. Because I do think that's going to be increasingly important. And I think that probably covers it, because I think Peter said most of the other stuff. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just going through the report, the financial strategy, I think there's value in further defining the parameters. And I think that's something that we need to do sooner rather than later. We talk about the parameters have been identified in workshops with councillors. I think we need to further hone in on those and make sure that we're getting a clear set of parameters in place that then are used as guidelines for the other work that's been put together. That obviously influences the size of the capital programme, the amount of operational saving that we're looking for, really provides those guiding principles in which we look at the activity plans and the capital programme. The activity plans, clearly, and you've pointed it out, there's a need for the budget to land so that we can look at those in a financial context as well as a service delivery context. You note, Peter, 4 to 6 weeks in the report in front of us. When are you expecting that we will have budgets in front of us alongside those activity plans?
When this report was written, because of the lead times of the committee, it was 10 days ago. We know a good deal more now than we did then. The figure I heard from Patricia yesterday was around 4 weeks to prepare the budgets. So I would anticipate, and this is subject to the financial staff talking further to it, that the end of the month would be about right. But it is a bit heavily contingent on ELT's deliberations on the savings to be built into those budgets. So there's a bit of chicken and egg there. The financial team has said we can deliver budgets in 4 weeks, but from when are the savings clear?
Yeah, because we need, so again, that's why we need to give early guidance through the parameters. and we expect the parameters that we provide to be the subject of the discussions that occur at ELT. But really, I think we need to be setting a clear expectation that those budgets will be in front of us within that 4 weeks or at the end of that 4 weeks that you're talking about. Otherwise, this does become an area of greater risk. And we're ahead of this at the moment. We need to make sure we stay ahead of it. There is some value in discussing the activity plans as we are at the moment, but there will be much more value in discussing them with budgets and savings alongside. So can I encourage the landing of those budgets as quickly as possible? And I think 4 weeks is reasonable. If it strayed too far outside of that, we'd be becoming concerned, I think.
So you'd be looking at the beginning of October, wouldn't you?
Beginning of October would be at the very outside, yes. Yeah. I mean, if we said a month from now, that takes us to the first week of October. That'll still be workable. If it was to be any longer than that, then we would be having some problems, which therefore means it cannot be any longer than that. Yeah. Okay. And then and I'll come to other questions in a minute, Sam. I see you signalling there as well. I'll come to you first. Capital prioritisation obviously is another piece of work that we need to do. It flows on directly from the setting of the parameters. And I agree with the approach that's set out here, but again, we need to make sure we do that sooner rather than later, because the assumptions that we start to make around the capital programme will play directly into operating expenses, activity plans, what we're proposing to do and what we're needing to pay for. So it's important that we do that capital prioritisation work early rather than late. And then on the engagement, I think it's important that we take the opportunity there for a discussion on what any pre-engagement might look like and what value it might have and what the subject areas of that pre-engagement might be. There have been some discussions informally already, and I think that's something that we need to be formalising sooner rather than later, because if there's going to be value in pre-engagement, depending what it is, the earlier we do that, the sooner we can start picking up the information that comes back as a result of it.
Understood.
Yep.
Look, I met with the engagement team last week, and I guess the crux of that discussion was the best information we have on the community is essentially pre-lockdown, and the world is different now. So if we wanted to understand what the community wants from the LTP, using a resident survey that was conducted in February is not actually going to be that timely. So there's a whole raft of thinking that the engagement team has done about how we could do this in a smart way and in an up-to-date way without spending a lot of money.
So again, I think we need that brought back to us sooner rather than later, because if we're going to use the results of any pre-engagement, any feedback that comes about as a result of that pre-engagement to influence the way that we're building the plan in its early stages, the sooner we've got that, the better. And as I say, there may be particular areas of focus that we want that pre-engagement to look at.
Understood.
All right, thank you. Sam.
Well, thank you, Peter. And I guess, some of it's a good report. Some of it is relatively alarming, though, particularly around that separate cover stuff. So the operational savings and activity budgets one, which is highlighted red. Can you just talk me through, because I guess that was the one that jumped out for me, and Dawn's obviously touched on it as well. But when you look back at the letter of expectation we set out for the LTP, it talks about the need for us to have the budgets at the same time as reviewing the activity plans. Can you allude to, I guess, basically why that hasn't happened?
Well, I think there's a series of explanations that the finance people could speak to, perhaps better than I can, but obviously one of the barriers has been that COVID-19 alert and lockdown and having run a second annual plan was a formidable barrier. That was over in basically towards the end of June. So I think that we, as I said earlier, we have a chicken and egg cycle here between the budgets and the savings. You can't build the budgets till you know what the savings looks like, and to some extent you don't know what you need to save until you know what the parameters look like for the budgets. So we need to break that cycle, and that work is progressing. As to the mechanics of exactly how the accounts work, I can't speak to that.
So the next one, I guess, because it talks about the budget process involving governance at every stage. Yet we've done, and I don't know if it might be a question more for Dawn or for Carol, but we've done 4 activity plans already with basically no figures at all or no savings, except for some real high-level stuff where we haven't got direction. I mean, I expressed concern at the time, but can you just talk me through how we're going to fix that? Because that is quite significant. I mean, there's no point doing an LTP if we don't have draft budgets.
Yeah, I'm happy to say that. So I'm not sure I completely agree with you, Sam, actually, because yes, you need to understand what your budgets are, but you also need to have a view about what are you prepared, what is it you want to continue doing, what is the things you want to concentrate on, what are the things you want to stop. Don't actually require money, they're about the principles of what it is the council should do. So I do think that dialogue is important, and having that also then shapes the budget. No COVID and no annual plan 2, we'd be in a position where we'd have activity plans and we'd have budgets. We don't. I can't unfix that. What are we doing about it? We've got a programme of savings that is probably around 24 million at the moment. We know we need to take that up to as close to 40 million as we can get it in light of the prospective parameters which we think are about there anyway, but we need to reconfirm. ELT this week, after seeing the first 4 and some of the challenges around that, some budget savings in there but nowhere near enough. We're saying, okay, we've gone through invest, stop, different, redirect, and we're utilising that information to go back into the budget lines. And just as we did in the annual plan 2, I've got Carolyn leading the capital work, and I spoke to Mary yesterday and said, okay, I want you to do the same thing in relation to the OPEX stuff that we did for annual plan 2, because we're not getting enough from the floor. And that's about the cultural shift as well. I expect us to be in that position by the end of the month.
Okay, so the other one was, I mean, obviously yesterday at that LTP briefing we talked about when the budgets would start getting underway, and Patricia alluded to sort of, was it 4 to 6 weeks from then, which puts us into, what, mid-October?
No, we're looking at the beginning of October.
So it could be delivered in that? Yeah, okay. Well, I wonder, Andrew, if we can just add something into the recommendations to drive that. So I have drafted something up. I just think to be more specific on the organisation.
I think we're agreed that, you know, I've already made some comments around this being a key focus of activity and timing.
Yeah.
Dawn has already reflected back that we expect to have that by the first week of October. So as long as what you're suggesting is aligned with that,
I've just flicked it to Samantha now. So
all right, if we can get whatever you've got in front of us. I do see value in continuing the early work on the activity plans because, you know, there've been good discussions, even though they haven't landed the specifics that we might have hoped we would be able to land with the budget alongside. But they do inform some of the budget work as we go. But equally, I do think we need to be looking at the overall table of potential operational savings. We need to go back and look at those savings that we took for 1 year for the annual plan and consider where there's an appetite to make those savings, either take them for a further year or make them more permanent.
And I think that probably more importantly at the moment, what we're hearing is we need to put a line in the sand as to when we actually get those draft budgets and savings. Yep. So hopefully Sam can just put that up.
Yeah, so absolutely. No, let's do that. And I think there's some really early work, and when I say early, I'm thinking, you know, probably next week, around reconfirming those parameters, which are then going to make all of these conversations we're saying we want to happen before the beginning of October a lot more easy to define.
Just while Sam's working on that, could I pose a basic plumbing question for you, Mr. Chair? If we're going to have discussions on the financial strategy parameters, the capital program and engagement, would it be more productive to have those in the meetings we've got in the next 2 or 3 weeks than to continue pursuing the activity plans? Or do you want to do both?
I think we need to be setting the parameters and doing the high-level work as a matter of priority. I think that's hugely important. But what I don't want is to be getting further behind on those higher-level discussions on the activity plans because we're waiting for the budget. I think there will, and maybe we identify those activity plans where we feel that there is value in talking about service delivery and opportunities for change and so on, as we have with some of the plans already. Maybe we can look at the activity plans where we think there's more value and more change likely to be found and focus on those. I do agree that having the activity plans and the budget side by side is what we need in order to be able to land a final position, but there'll be some early discussions that we can have in the meantime while we're waiting for the budgets that will still have value.
So Andrew, my one's up there now if that helps people.
All right. Request that draft activity budgets, which must include savings required to reduce operational expenditure by 26 million, plus options to reduce it significantly further, are provided to councils in activity plans by the 5th of October to ensure that the requirements of the letter of expectation are met. All proposed savings must be highlighted for council decision making.
So, Andrew, if I could just comment on that,
Please do.
Chair. I think whether it's actually in the activity plans is a different issue. For me, I think you need the full list of potential savings, as we did for annual plan 2. What does that look like? Full list look like?
But we want draft activity budgets as well, though.
Yes.
That's what I mean. We can put it to the floor, but we just need a line in the sand to actually move forward, or else we're going to go around in circles.
So if we were to take out the words in activity plans, that would allow us to provide it by whatever means. And if that means it can be provided in a way that's easier for us to consider and easier, the objective here is finding opportunities for savings. That may be in activity plans, or it may be by some other means.
Yeah, I think it's what I don't want is to get to the 5th of October and then we go, oh no, we need a couple more weeks to pull it into a form that we can read. Yeah, so by the 5th of October we need draft activity plans or budget, basically revised budgets and the savings as well, and hopefully that captures it.
Yeah, because depending on what you do in the savings profile, because you would look at that, rather than doing what you've always done, which is you've looked at, well you haven't because you haven't been here, members have looked at individual activity plans and individual budgets, and then you've looked at it at that and said, oh, we'll have a bit more of that, a bit less of that, whatever it might be. We need to look at the budget in total and the savings plan in total. So you can go, no, we want more of that. Yes, we want significantly less of that. That will then impact on what the activity budgets
but we
look like.
We do also need ELT to have come up with ingrained savings before they get to us.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that kind of captures that as well.
It does.
Yeah, and the work that I want us to be doing on parameters next week will set those goalposts as well.
Yeah.
All right, so if we were to remove the words in activity plans, Sam, would you be comfortable with that?
Fine.
Yep. I think, it's by whatever means. It may be in the activity plans, it may be by some other mechanism.
And finished by the 5th.
Yeah. All right. That's all good. So if we take you as the mover of this resolution when we get there with that additional clause in, that's fine. All right, so now coming to... So was there anything else from you, Sam? All right. So I've now got a number of people indicating questions. I've got Aaron, Melanie, Sarah, Yanni, Jake, and Anne. Right. Aaron.
Yeah, so Peter, just a question around with this setting of budgets, and at the moment, from the briefings we've had so far, the direction doesn't seem to be that clear. So what are you working to if you're doing the budgets first, or do you need more direction before they start coming up?
Well, the budgets that would be normally built for an activity support the levels of service. They're what you need to make those levels of service happen.
Yeah, but so are you feeling like from the ones we've had so far you're getting a clear steer of which direction they should be going? Because I'm there and don't feel it. But
I can only offer a personal opinion. I thought the libraries plan was well presented and it gave options on savings going forward.
Yes,
I'm
I
not sure
100% agree.
Were the same.
Right. So they need to be clearer on options, but are you feeling this table's been clear on direction when they're presented?
I'm not sure the managers have walked away with a clear picture of what the saving is or isn't.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Melanie.
Dawn, you talked about the operational budgets or plans or whatever for the activity plans, and you talked about geography and other things. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So my thinking is, again, and I'll highlight two areas that immediately sprung to mind in the debates we've had on the 4 activity plans so far. One on libraries, where we were discussing libraries, and then we went and you discussed voluntary libraries, which happened to be in another activity plan that has not come forward. They are interrelated, yet they're being looked at separately. We discussed the parks work, the parks activity plan, and then we were discussing the swales, which land drainage put in. Right. And again, that's in a separate activity plan at a different time in the schedule. So what it's doing is it's highlighting actually the interrelationship on certain things, which is why I stress to you, I think we need to look at the whole programme and talk through what that looks like, which will impact then on the activity plans. And the other side of that equation, Melanie, is the levels of service. We collectively have not really discussed what should or could that look like from a governance perspective, and I think we really do need to do that.
Yeah, and that leads me just to my other point, really, is that it seems to me we're talking about often cutting budget lines, but we aren't talking about, like you're saying, levels of service and reducing the amount within each budget line.
Yeah.
It never really came up.
Yeah.
We're not cutting the fat, we're just cutting potentially services, and I'm not happy with that at all.
Yeah. So you've got to think, because savings is your shorthand. In the end, we know that the council's challenge is a range on its financial budget. That needs to be a perspective of where do you want to continue to spend the resource? Where could we drive more income? Because income will contribute to the bottom line. What do we think we should change because we're doing it and it's really long-winded, inefficient and a bit bonkers, if I can say that, in council? And fourthly, and members have to accept when you're talking about the numbers we are talking about, it will require us to change some things that we're doing and reduce some things and potentially stop things on those sorts of numbers. So that relates then to the levels of service. And if we have services, for example, that are operating at 100% when the level of service we've set currently is 85, we should be questioning ourselves, should we be operating at that level? Do we need to operate at that level? Which would bring savings. So it's a whole smorgasbord of choice. It's not just cut the budget and therefore cut services. But some of those things would have to be that on those levels. And I wouldn't want members to believe that that isn't the case.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Just a quick point on Resolution 2 there, the additional one. Just that all proposed savings must be highlighted for council decision making. I'm not quite sure the stage of the process. The actual decision making is next year in the LTP. So whether it's at this stage for guidance, that kind of thing. It's just that, yeah.
So just all proposed savings must be highlighted. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
If we can make that change.
Yeah. I mean, the decision making is not for a long time. Yeah.
So all proposed savings must be highlighted. If you just remove the words for council decision making.
Yeah.
There will, ultimately there will be a council decision, but it'll be in June 2021.
Yeah.
Or, well, it'll be when we go out with the draft, first of all, and then it'll be in June 2021 as a final decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yanni.
The thing I'm still struggling with this process is the lack of visibility on like the individual strategies. So if I take the arts strategy, there's actually a really awesome implementation plan that staff have sent through to me, which is actually really good. It's plain English, it's clear kind of objectives, milestones, but it doesn't have any sort of budget attached to each action, although it's got timing. So I just, I've just looked at the water supply one, where we've got a water strategy, a water implementation plan being developed, and yet we're being asked today to consider the water supply activity management plan without any understanding of the implementation plan. So I'm trying to kind of understand at a high level how these plans are reflective of the strategies that we've agreed with our communities that we will do, and then what happens in terms of the choice between what we've agreed with the community versus the issue like saving reductions, and how we get visibility of that as we go through.
Okay, there's two parts to that answer. One is the same answer I gave last month, which is that each activity may or may not have a strategy. The strategy may or may not have an implementation plan. It may or may not have a budget for that. So each one is a case-by-case basis. They're all different. And it's the head of's job to make sure that their activity plan explains how their activity relates to the strategy, if in fact there is one, and it has a plan, and it has a budget. The other thing is, though, and this is a tough one to broach, is that I'm echoing Dawn's sentiment about activity plans being kind of silos and that you need to see the whole. Council approves strategies in the same way. Over the term of its life, it will approve a number of strategies, and there will be other strategies that were approved by previous councils. If you add them all up, you may not be able to afford them. And the LTP is the mechanism by which you decide what stands or falls from all of those decisions that have stacked up over months or perhaps years around strategies. In reality, the decision of what gets implemented is the LTP and the annual plan, rather than the adoption of a strategy as one component coming off a conveyor belt.
So I guess the question really is, should the implementation plans be coming along with the activity management plans? So when we see what we've agreed with the community through a consultation and engagement process, what we can see is what the budget implications are if we want to agree to what's been agreed, or we can say, actually, this is no longer what we're going to do. But because I just can't see otherwise how we have transparency over that. Like, it's certainly not, from my reading of the documents we've got, it's really not clear.
Okay, look, if there is a strategy behind an activity plan, when the manager explains the outcomes they're trying to achieve, they should be talking to that strategy and saying, under strategy X, these are the outcomes we're trying to deliver, these are the outputs that will make them happen, this is the budget that's required as it relates to the strategy. But if they're not doing that, then that needs to be raised, or it may be that the priorities have changed since then.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say, and it's a difficult one, is that the approval of the strategy, say 2 years ago, does not lock the current LTP into doing exactly that in the face of changed financial position, changed priorities, new strategic direction.
I get all that.
Moment.
I get all that. But what we're often told when we adopt a strategy without any budget is A, it will be done under existing budgets, or B, it'll be an implementation plan that will be developed that will inform the LTP or the annual plan.
And I think you have every right to expect that when you see the activity plan.
Okay. Well, I'll be raising the water supply implementation plan again today for about the 5th time in the last 2 weeks. You know.
That opportunity will come when we do the activity plans.
In terms of the time frame, surely we should align, if we're developing an implementation plan, we should align the activity management plan report back to council when that implementation plan is ready.
So we've already talked about the alignment of the activity plans, the draft activity plans, with the strategic directions, with the community outcomes. And I guess what Yanni is now raising, and I would have expected it would have been the case already, that those activity plans should also be aligned with any strategies and implementation plans or action plans of those strategies. And that, as you quite rightly say, Peter, is the moment when we have the opportunity to decide the priority that we give and any other matters relating to the implementation of those strategies. So it's another area of alignment that we absolutely expect to see.
Does that feel like we get lost in the activity management plans and levels of service without looking at the strategic outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And I think the EAG kind of reflected that.
Yeah.
So just the final question from me was around the community board one, where we've got the community board plans. It's not the thing was supposed to be up on the 2nd, and it's not there, but I can understand that. It's coming on the 15th of September. It's 3 hours. Are we anticipating the community board chairs to attend that?
Look, I need to talk to John Philsell, but I believe that's the case.
Right.
It's meant to be a joined up process, so it's not a standalone.
Yeah.
So I believe the board chairs will be there to talk to the plans.
So having just come from a community board planning session yesterday, apologies for not being at YMAC, just in terms of being constructive on the day when the community boards come and talk to us, are we clear about what information we want them to bring in terms of budget implications?
Look, I think maybe I need John to come back to you with the detail on that, because he's organising that event.
I think we need to pick it up as part of the LTP planning as well. There have been very good iterations of those type of meetings in the past, and there have been not so good iterations of those type of meetings in the past. We need to make sure we get this right. We need to get ahead of it in the LTP planning so that we know exactly what is intended and that the boards are ready for what's intended and prepared for it.
The fault there lies with me. John has developed a program of work for that event and a schedule. Or an agenda, I'm sorry. I just can't recall what he's put in it.
Can we pick it up offline?
Sure.
Because we need it to be useful and effective.
And it would be useful if you could give some feedback. If you say some things have worked in the past and others have not, it would be very useful to understand what hasn't and why.
Yeah.
So we know not to make that same mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just circle briefly back to Councillor Johansson's point about strategies, strategic directions, outcomes? It's been my observation that when all councils go through these plans, that the front piece, which is what is this activity going to do about our to give effect to our strategic directions, community outcomes, and our strategies, is that collectively councils tend to go past that pages very quickly to get to the budgets and levels of service. And so the time is not spent on understanding that front end, that strategic front end of the activity in the race to get to budgets, projects, levels of service. I do recall previous councils where those discussions on $100 million activities simply took less than 10 seconds before we went straight to budgets and into the weeds. But that front end, the managers do spend a lot of time talking about how they are going to address our strategic priorities, community outcomes, etc. And if there's a fault in what they're doing there or thinking there, the discussion needs to be had. But it's customary for all councils to move through quite quickly to get to the concrete mechanics.
So we've deliberately this time taken a very standardised approach to the way that those activity plans are presented. And I think coming out of Yanni's highlighting of this issue in this meeting, that standardised approach needs to be not just regard to strategic directions, community outcomes, but also to strategies and associated implementation plans or action plans.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, Andrew, we've just had a chat with Carol, who's obviously leaving tomorrow, and Di, who's taking over.
Yes.
And they've just come up with some more wording, which they're going to bring up in a minute, and it just, sorry to drag it out, it just makes it a lot more clear. Yeah. So it's basically, there'll be draft operational budgets. Before then, we'll have the savings identified and reported to us, and then following that, it requests that draft activity budgets are prepared ASAP.
All right.
So it's just putting it in a line in the sand, and it notes Sarah's point about we can't make decisions yet, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So some work's going on that. I was going to check in with Dawn to make sure that what we'd got was capable of being implemented and worked anyway.
I think this will be a lot more structured.
So you've obviously preempted that, and that's good. So let me finish with questions, and then we'll come back to that matter so that before we start debating anything, we've got a clear set of resolutions in front of us that you'll be the mover of, so you need to be comfortable with the wording of. Yep, all right, that's fine. So coming back to questions, Jake, did you have something?
Oh no, I was just happy to second.
All right, so when we get there, we'll note that as well. Just noting that there may be a change to the wording, so I'll come back and check in with you at that point. All right, that's fine. And Anne, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just, you used the word co-current development, and I'm just wondering where the community fits into that. I see on our event schedule that we don't get to hear from Di until the 3rd of November, and there's a question mark there. Is there any value in meeting with the comms team earlier to just talk about some of the ideas that you've alluded to in terms of engaging the community in this process of developing an LTP in a way that is sort of just a dipping in? For example, the libraries and some of the things we had discussion on the other day. Is there an opportunity to go to the community in a very sort of brief, quick way to get a response? You know, would you be happy with this or this? And getting a sense from community on where we're heading.
Yes, and that's why I posed the question about whether the activity plan scheduled for this month should go ahead, given the amendment that's being put up, or if you wanted to use those time slots, because I need to get straight into the plumbing here. Council time slots, Finance Committee time slots are hard to get. Briefings are hard to get. Your diaries are basically at capacity. So it does present a dilemma that if you wanted to talk to the engagement team, talk about the capital program earlier, talk about the parameters, that's either extra to what you've got scheduled this month, or you could do instead of. Now, I'm hearing that you don't want to stop with the activity plans, but that means finding more time. The engagement team is ready to talk to you. They've got a good program of work, quite targeted. They know how they could do it. And I think there's even a degree of nervousness that we'd like to get some of this done just in case that, for example, there's another lockdown and you can't do it. So there's various reasons why they would like to talk to you early. And I'm hearing that you'd like to talk to them. It's just basic plumbing about how do we make that possible.
So coming back to my earlier comments, I think that early conversation with the engagement team is essential. I'm aware of, conversations that are going on that we want to daylight around early engagement, possible engagements around particular activities. The engagement team have obviously already done some work, as you say, which is ready to be put in front of us. I'm really keen to see how that aligns with some of the other good ideas that have been raised already. And if we're going to do pre-engagement, in many ways, the earlier we do that, the earlier we can take the benefit of it and build it into the way that we're planning the LTP, developing the LTP. So I do think that there are some areas where we need to absolutely lift these things up and do them earlier. The engagement would be one. The prioritisation of the capital programme would be another. The budget table and looking at those savings that we took for 1 year in the annual plan that we might have an appetite to take for a further year or even longer in the LTP. That's all work that we can be getting on with, and we want to prioritise above some of the other work. If that means re-timetabling, then that's what we need to do. But I'm certainly not suggesting that we stop all work on the activity plans in the meantime. Okay. I think there's value, but also having a look at which of the activity plans are the ones we can most valuably spend time on before we've got the budgets, realising that we're not going to give any final guidance or any clear direction on a lot of those until we can see them with the budgets alongside. But we've got to keep this moving, otherwise we're going to put ourselves under a lot of pressure at the other end of the timescale. And also noting your comments around COVID levels, we need to get ahead of this in case we end up in and let's hope we don't, but we end up in a more restrictive level than we have been in, that then impacts on our ability to do the work.
Okay.
So on the engagement, there's a very simple solution. We just switch one for another and just bring it forward.
Yep.
And Peter and I can sort that out. I want to be in a position whereby we can take the Tuesdays that you have on Community Week and utilise those days properly and fully, not just an hour here, an hour there, but actually book full days, and we do the LTP, and we do that right until Christmas.
And that's learning from the way we did the annual plan take two. Which, we did a lot of work in a very short time. That was the way we went about that. I think that's what we need to be replicating here. Clearly, there are some conversations to take offline as a result of the commentary in this meeting, but there's a sentiment that there's an order of things that needs to occur so that we can get to the best result, which is the level of savings that we're looking for and the ability to take a good, hard look at the capital programme. Anne, did you have something further?
Another question, if I may. We've talked a lot about engaging volunteering and in different areas. We talked about it in the libraries and we talked about it in parks as well. Is there an opportunity to lift that up as breaking down the silos as an overall strategy? And how would we do that through funding, long-term plan type stuff? I'd be interested to know if that's a possibility.
I'm sure it's a possibility, but I don't have a comprehensive answer for you straight away. I think that would be something to discuss with the operational heads, parks and so forth, about what shape that would take and how we'd roll it out. So I don't want to just answer off the hip.
But please don't see that as a panacea for what will be some difficult decisions.
I get that.
Yeah, but certainly it's something we can have top of mind as we look at the activity plans for those areas where there are opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen some of that already. All right, thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? All right, that's been a good discussion.
Very good.
And it's resulted in some actions that we'll pick up outside of this meeting, but that we'll see make some change in programming and content from next week onwards, I would say. That's good. Now, Sam, where have we got to with your resolution?
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. So it just spells out exactly what needs to happen, and then so basically, they're gonna come up with the savings, then incorporate, after, and bring it to council, run it through the operational budgets, and then after that they'll go away and work through the draft activity management plans.
That's fine.
Which is what we wanted, but it's just hopefully puts a timeline on it.
Yeah, that's okay.
So you're comfortable with resolutions 1 to 4?
Yep.
Yeah, and Dawn, that's
Yes,
workable
I'm
from
fine.
your team's point of view?
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. So Sam, you're moving this. Jake, you're happy to second? Fantastic. So that puts it on the table. Is there any discussion? I think a lot of what needs to be said has been teased out by way of questions and answers and comments as we've had a reasonably free-flowing discussion, but I think that's been useful. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Peter, thank you very much indeed for answers to questions and for the report. And thanks, in fact, to everybody who's working on all of the different strands of work that are feeding into the long-term plan. It's a huge piece of work, and it needs to be, because it's a big job that we've got in front of us. So thank you to you and to the team as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, now that brings us to 11 o'clock. I propose that we take a 10-minute break at this point, and come back at 10 past 11 to work through the rest of the agenda. So let's adjourn until 10 past 11. Thank you.
but
And we'll move to item 11, the Asset Management Improvement Programme update. So Piers, welcome to the table. And if you'd like to make some comments on this report before we take questions. Thank you. And you've got a presentation, in fact, haven't you?
Morning, everybody. I'll take the report as read, and I'm going to just take you briefly through the presentation I've got here, just to really put some context as to why you're getting the report and some of the components within the report. So I think putting that into context, certainly from the points that Peter raised with Audit New Zealand's focus around some of the asset management capability, condition and performance data, there's an interesting quote that came out from a few years ago. It's important because much of public service delivery relies on assets. Unless those assets are well managed, the services they support will suffer. Assets are sometimes taken for granted until they fail. Those failed assets have social and economic effects on the communities they serve. And those assets represent a significant investment by New Zealanders that need protecting. So I think we probably take all of that sometimes for granted. Certainly with the LTP program that we have at the moment, that is coming sharply into focus as to the challenges that the teams face in delivering an LTP within the budgets and constraints that they've got. I think putting it into context for there, we have now $17 billion worth of assets, so not an inconsiderable dollar value associated with it. I think for asset management for council, it's important to remember or to be reminded that we deliver it through a mix of centralised and decentralised resources with the teams that actually manage the assets, and my team in particular that help the improvement of the way that we manage those assets and ensure that we can deliver that capability. Where do you guys fit into it? Well, your oversight of this program is therefore part of that systemised approach that we're taking. It's about raising that visibility around how we're improving it and ensuring that those soft spots that we talk about are identified and that we can actually do something about it moving forward. Indeed, the Scottish Economic Regulator has identified and has quite a lot of information and evidence around how asset management is going to provide that significant long-term savings and leading to our reduced reactive maintenance. So that typically is a 4-to-1 ratio. If we can get to an asset before it fails at just exactly the right time, rule of thumb is that we will be spending considerably less on that rather than when it does fail with a pipe burst or a pump failure or whatever it might be. So that's ultimately what we're here to do, is to improve the way we manage that. We're on that improvement journey, and as the report highlighted, we have an asset maturity assessment. It's number 3 in the program that we have at the moment, and what we're looking at here is the 2016 and 2018 reports with the green line showing an appropriate level of asset management. The teams are not here to deliver perfection, because with that perfection comes cost and increasing level, reducing value proposition. So you can see that in those years that we have made improvements across the entire organisation. And within that space, we also have, for each one of those teams, we measure against 16 metrics. And I'll excuse you if you can't read and ingest all of those components, but it's pretty comprehensive. We have an assessment ongoing as of right now. In fact, the interviews are happening as I speak. Bringing that into where the team fits into the asset management improvement, some of you will have seen this in previous reports. We take a people-focused approach on capability. How do we identify where some of the challenges are that the teams have? We're looking at the process enablers and developing capability in that, and so that's looking at everything from what are our critical processes, so we can identify whether or not there are likely to be any surprises coming up. The information for evidence. You're all faced with making challenging, very difficult decisions. You need the information to be able to do it, and you need to be able to trust that the information is giving you the right perspective on the environment that you're governing. And obviously, technologies to enable. How do we extract the most value from the systems and capability that we've got sitting in council? Where does that lead us to the actual program itself? What you're looking at here is a number of projects, initiatives, and BAU support activities that help drive the improvement program, and that's spread across all the asset owners. So you can see we take from a really high-level perspective of supporting LTP program development, and where you actually fit into that is making sure that we're progressing appropriately. So in hindsight, last financial year's program we completed on time, within budget and to scope. So we did what we said we were going to do. We've delivered a valuations project which has helped support the finance team in understanding the valuation of our assets and all the implications of that that value for our Three Waters network this particular cycle. Indeed, it's actually resulted in a fairly substantial shift in the valuation of our assets, up by about $2.87 billion. Certainly that is a significant shift, and that's to do with a lot of capability of understanding how those values are actually derived. And I think that you're going to be receiving some commentary from the finance team in due course. In the facilities side, we've been focused on ensuring that they've got the data about our assets, ensuring that they've got the right condition and performance data, so that when you're actually looking at these programs and figuring out where you can actually make savings or where you should be investing, that particularly in that area that they've got the capability to do it. And so we've closed out a number of projects in that area specifically to lift that, specifically within the asset management systems themselves. From the asset management planning capability, we've closed out stage 1 of the AMPs. Now, we've heard quite a lot of discourse around the asset management plans. Some of them are in an excellent state. Some of them certainly allow us to now focus on the second stage of it, which is understanding where the soft spots are and how do we actually support the teams as we get towards the end of our LTP process. And I think that standardising approach that we've taken this time around, we've provided a lot of support for the teams. We've enabled visibility of the challenges not only to the teams, but also externally as well. A small project in and of itself, and you may think, well, you know, it's a BAU piece of work, but these are the sort of projects that help save money at the OPEX space, and you'll see within the report the figures associated with that. What does that mean? It means that we can actually invest that OPEX in other areas that are also needing it. Looking forward, we've got a white paper, and there's a resolution to provide that white paper to you around what future state of asset management looks like at Council, and that's coming up audit and risk sometime in October. We've got an asset condition and performance report, particularly pertinent given Audit New Zealand's focus on how data is actually enabling you to make those decisions. Council will be seeing a Three Waters LTP planning tool. This is something I talked about about 2 years ago. And one of the challenges that we faced with the program was to be able to give you the options and the what-if scenarios. And this is a huge leap for Council in the capability of being able to turn around the what-if. What if we insert whatever the scenario is? Would typically take the teams weeks to turn that around and provide a scenario back to Council as to what that looks like. That takes about 15 seconds now to do those what-if scenarios. So we've got that capability, and you're going to see a brief snapshot of what the outcomes of that means. And as I alluded to before, we've got an asset maturity assessment, and that's going to be coming up in December, and that helps set the focus for where we're going to go to next with the activities. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of what the program is in and of itself. I know that sometimes it feels a bit dry, but it is an important baseline for a lot of the work and budgets that the teams are working through. So I'll put it out to questions to the floor.
Just one comment, Andrew. If you go back to the previous slide, you did ask that when we got that asset maturity assessment report in, going to Audit and Risk, that we have a joint briefing prior to it going, because it's kind of almost, well, equal interest to you, and we'll bring in the external people on that Audit and Risk, and we'll do a joint briefing on that, so that it's a little bit difficult because we report half and half to the two committees, but you did ask for that at the...
So a joint briefing of this committee and the Audit and Risk Committee, which includes the Audit and Risk externals.
When we get that report in December.
Yep, perfect, thank you. So just to kick off, a $2.87 billion shift in the value of Three Waters assets. That's a big number, even with the sort of numbers that we deal with. How can that be?
There's a number of reasons that have led us to that. One, at the time of the valuations, my team became more heavily involved in actually understanding the data that actually drove previous valuations, the methods, process, and mechanisms that were used. So, as an example, reviewing the unit rates that drive, you know, how much does it cost to put a pipe in the ground or a replacement of whatever it might be. And so some of those reviews with the external consultant highlighted that the mechanism of replacement and the way that we figure out how much it costs, as in contract award value versus actual putting the pipe in the ground cost, those were two different sets of numbers. So those were then brought in and the process has been adjusted. We've certainly discovered when we're reviewing the asset registers, knowing what we own, what does that actually mean, and understanding what we don't have in the system and where they live on different spreadsheets. So a lot of work has been gone on to pull information and data off spreadsheets, get it into the system, because it's that feeds a lot of the work that the finance team and my asset systems team work together with the consultant to understand what that shift could be.
There was a paper yesterday to Audit and Risk on, and look, I can't remember the details, but there was about 15 different lines that they had about talking about the shifts in those values. Basically, it wasn't really discussed, but it was part of the valuation report. I think the first on the Audit and Risk Committee meeting yesterday, you concentrated on the second part of that paper, more around the CCHL values, but in that was the front part of that was the water shift prepared by Len.
Yep, and obviously valuation of water assets is something that may well feed into other conversations in the near future as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So an important piece of work to recognise it.
Yep, that's great. Okay, moving to questions. Aaron, Melanie, Yanni. Aaron.
Yeah, I like how your first slide had that everyone underappreciates assets until they fail. That's a classic, and something for councils to live their life by. Do you have a working sheet where every single asset as it comes in or is repaired or renewed, it goes into say it's got a 50-year life or a 10-year life, whatever, that every single one goes into, and then we have each year it changes to a must repair, should repair, could repair. So they just, and as you assess them and some will be 5 or 10 year or whatever, then it might move out or it might move forward, but we know that in say 2033 we're up for one hell of a bill on one particular item, so just so we can always see that over a really long term, because then some savings can be made in advance by doing some work which would really help dictate how you might spend some of your infrastructure. And also if it's really simple like that, the public can see it and then kind of go, oh, that's why my rates are going to go up then, or let's not ask for another stadium or 5 more libraries and 10 more swimming pools because we want drinking water.
Correct. So the answer to that is yes and no. So what you're talking about is some of the previous capability that we've had, and you, as point number 3 on there, you're going to get some visibility of that capability. Where it's shifted from, instead of saying pipe's 33 years old, we've got to replace it, it's actually based on not only just the condition of it, as in has it cracks or whatever, but more importantly using performance information. So to put that into simple terms, it's like putting a brand new roof on your house. Condition's pretty good, but that roof leaks. It's pretty poor performance.
Yep.
So when you start bringing performance data into that space, you start building a much better picture. So if you take that and where we've moved to, is you now need to understand, well, what is the consequence of that failure? You might have a lot of buckets and you might be happy to live with the buckets. So you put the buckets out. Or you may not be. You may say, I don't want my roof to leak at all. And so what that does, and where the tool you'll get visibility of, is to enable you to start understanding how you balance risk. So the second part of the question is how do we make that consumable by the public? That is a slightly separate question around how do we take very, very complex capability and distill that down into. But I think it's a valuable story to tell for the public to understand why we invest in the way that we could or should.
Piers,
Yeah.
Aaron, do you mind if I just flow up? Because I'm not sure you fully answered it, or maybe I missed it, and I apologise if I did, because 3 relates to 3 waters.
Correct.
Aaron, I think you specifically asked, do we have a full list of every asset?
Yeah, right down to bridges and road
so that would
services,
be the
footpaths, the
asset
whole lot.
register that you're referring to. Okay, my apologies.
If you have a look in
It's either a yes or no answer.
that slide there, you will see one of those will be data completion. We've got very good information on some assets. For roading, I could well, this is the roading asset management plan here. It's got it absolutely there, DTIMS, whatever. Three Waters, stormwater is pretty good. Parks is pretty good as well. As we get down maybe into other assets, it gets worse.
So the answer is no then, isn't it?
The information is not, yes.
But I think it's a qualified no that it's not appropriate to have 100% data about all of your assets. You have to be able to you have to balance the amount of investment that you put into that information against the outcome that you need. So as an example, Skirt CCTV, the wastewater network, there's $120 million worth of investment that went into collecting that data. And we have that now. Is it appropriate for you to continue to spend $120 million a year keeping that information up to date over the next 3 years? Some might argue.
Well, no, it's not, but it gives you your start point, and then you can add, or like as there's replacements or work goes on. If it's a continually rolling, like a working spreadsheet, I mean, it's a giant one, but it should be there because that way it can influence other spending, and because one of the big complaints the council gets, not one, I mean there's plenty, but one of them is when we do something in a particular area, then undo it 6 months or a year later for a change of something else. It's obviously because the system doesn't talk to itself that we went and changed a pipe or did something else within a year, whereas that register would tell you that there's something in there that's got a 5 or a 7 year life of a 50. Mm-hmm. So it's cheaper to do it, and I've heard Dave bring it up, cheaper to do it now than leave it and redig the road in 3 years, or if it yields within this year, then we're repairing doing the repair and repairing the road, and you've wrecked a really good surface.
That's the performance that you're talking about, and certainly a lot of that information is brought to bear on the programs that are being collated at the moment.
And we do try and deconflict those projects as much as possible. It's actually a risk of, do I bring something that's going to fail potentially in the next 5 years forward because that'll cost you a little bit more? What about in 10 years and, oh, blow, the 10 years was not quite right and it failed in 5. There's a trade-off and there's a cost to that. But we do try and deconflict everything as much as we possibly can prior to doing that top coat seal. But yes, variety of successes.
All right, thank you. Melanie.
So I wanted to talk to this slide. There's two bars, one's decision making and the other one's management systems that haven't seen any improvement over the last, 3 years, I guess. I was wondering why not and what needs to be done, and particularly the management systems, which is way down.
Yeah, so for the 16 to 18 audit that was carried out, which is what you're looking at here, obviously there were a number of areas that we wanted to improve on, and one of those was around the quality management culture within the teams, and that's been addressed, and I think we're going to see some quite significant changes. Indeed, I know certainly once again in the Three Waters space that there are teams that are specifically focused on that area.
What's the part about decision making?
So the decision making was around the overall governance and capability of providing that information. So it's things like these tools that I've alluded to that are going to give you that visibility.
Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you. I was really interested in the point you made about how we value in terms of the cost of actually doing versus book value or whatever else. So I just wondered how that process is informing our capital program for our LTP or our operational program. Like, are we changing, because we've got this new valuation, is it changing the cost of what we do? And if so, how is that reflected in our budgets?
Certainly we're underway in reviewing how those shifts in the valuation is going to be impacting the programs. So yes, I guess is the answer to your question. It is underway being reviewed.
Those values will have two big impacts on us, obviously insurance potentially and also rates. Carol's going to rate Three Waters a lot. Horrible lady. But that has a huge impact on those of direct operational cost.
Right.
And then basically, obviously, because they're the optimised replacement values, the construction cost means if you give me $1 million, I can do a little bit less as prices go up, obviously, and it's the program of works that you get in. It doesn't, in actual fact, change the priority of replacement, and that was one of the projects that came up around optimising which ones we do based on vulnerability, based on age, based on condition. That Three Waters LTP planning, that'll go to the Three Waters Committee just as a briefing for half an hour, just to give you an idea of how we generate candidates admittedly in the Three Waters space to do replacement. But equally, if I have a look in here, and it won't mean anything to you, there's a deterioration model for roads that has been developed at a national level, which is pushed by, it's called DTIMS, and all, again, the detail in the asset management plan around that deterioration model shows and gives you a profile of that replacement. Now, the value doesn't replace, doesn't have any impact on the priority, but it obviously has an impact on how much you can replace.
Does it? But so, I mean, North Avon Road's a really good example. We had 1.5 million in for budget. It came back to 3 million and ended up being 6 at the end. And so when we put a budget in, you know, an annual plan or an LTP, the confidence around the cost of replacing the asset or doing the work has changed because of this
and
valuation.
we've brought that back to you as a closeout report, and we told you about coal tar and all of the underlying conditions in there, and we explained that to you. Now we have built in coal tar into our current estimates, but when we did the original estimate for that, coal tar could just be milled into the ground and whatever. The environmental standards change, and you know, I'll send you another copy of that closeout report if you like, which explains.
All I was trying to understand though, in terms of our LTP, our capital program, based on the asset management performance and understanding of the value, are we likely to see an inflated cost of what we do because we now have more information about the true cost rather than those high level kind of estimates?
I think that's something that we'd have to review with the project management office, with the projects that are being put forward in the LTP. We've certainly fed the visibility of that back through into the organisation. And as I said, the review of the 6 areas that were identified as what drove that shift in value are actively being reviewed at the moment. Okay. Indeed, I've got a meeting with Di Brandish coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Right, okay. All work, however, we put out for competitive bid, and so it's actually a subject of the market really about what prices we get in. But obviously, a good example, coal tar, we are doing more investigation into coal tar, so we can say, I'll make something up here, that there's, 500 cubic metres that need to be carted off-site to a secure landfill, and we will ask them to price that in as part of their tender so that we get a better fixed term rather than doing it as a variation. So we change our behaviour as new risks and new regulations. Lizards would be a classic, another example of the world's changed a lot because of lizards in the last 12 months, and we are building that not necessarily into the cost of construction, but certainly into our program, because I have to do a large relocation if I know that there's lizards on site, which could delay the program for 6 months or 12 months.
So the only other question I had, and thank you for the work you're doing. I mean, I think this is really important work. Just in terms of smart cities and use of technology, I think someone said, for example, if we put cameras on all the waste trucks that go around, we could get some quite good asset data. How is this program linked to the smart cities program in terms of use of technology to get better asset information?
Yeah, so there are a number of areas that we've got underway. Hopefully you know what I mean when I say Internet of Things.
Yeah.
So this is around sensors being embedded into, and there's a lot of work that's underway in a lot of the asset owners, whether it's roading for putting cameras on trucks right the way through to understanding and measuring shocks through the water network or through to bins or whatever it might be that's going on there. As far as specific pieces of work linked into smart cities, it's really trying to understand where their programs are going and what we can actually leverage in that space. So there's been a workshop that one of my team attended last week specifically around smart cities. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So does it extend to the contractors as well, like in terms of the ones that are doing the maintenance? Because I guess that's the other striking thing about this report, is that we spend all this money on maintenance, and you'd expect the contractors to have really good information around maintenance, but we still seem to have these huge gaps.
And we are working on that with our contractors at this point in time. Dawn and I were talking about this morning around some of the information that's sitting with our contractors, which I believe is our data, and we should have that. So you may or may not remember, at the last technical audit that we had from NZTA, they talked about our not having good linkage between maintenance work and actual assets, so we couldn't do a proper economic analysis. They are about to come back to do a second audit on us, or sorry, they do them every 3 years, and that's due for the second quarter this year. So they are here sometime between October, November, December. They're actually going to do a double audit on us because they're doing a procedural one, but that will show, I think, quite a significant improvement over the last findings that we found, linking that exact information that you're talking about. The other thing that you've got to remember, you gave, or we agreed in the program for the 40 million of smart networks for the water network. That will certainly impact the asset management program, because it'll give us ideas of where pumps are spiking pressures and things like that. So it may give us ideas of, or give us strong guidance about where we need to update the variable speed drives, where we've got old technology that's putting water hammer through the system. Hopefully that then relays to less maintenance because we get less breakages, because we don't get those big pressure spikes coming through, which we get through our network.
I think just sort of adding to that, a lot of the approach over the last year for the team has been looking holistically at the whole life cycle of collecting that type of information. And it's not just a technical component of send an analyst out to go and collect it or ask the contractor to do it. It's about educating procurement and contract management teams to understand how to put clauses into contracts to collect the information. But you also have to bring the analysts on board to help a procurement and a contract specialist understand how that information has to be brought in. So we've got a piece of work that's being shared between Three Waters and Parks, for instance, around really driving a shift in the way that we collect that maintenance and operations information, bringing that back in. Same to a lesser extent for facilities, they'll be coming on board with that pilot. So this goes back to the cookie cutter approach that I've talked to you in previous updates. We review a piece of capability, we deliver a shift in that capability, and then we try and bring that through to other verticals within the organisation. And so facilities now, we've just started talks around mobile data capture and how do we get that into their contract renewal now.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? All right, so we've got resolutions in front of us. Now, noting the next asset management maturity assessment is scheduled for September, and the report will be provided to the December meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee, but that's the one that will lead to that briefing of both committees, so it's important to note that. I'm happy to move those recommendations. Aaron, you'll second. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed. So now we move to the St Albans Pavilion closeout report, item 12. So Darren, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. So we have this report that we can take as read.
Yes.
Are there any comments or particular areas that you wanted to highlight?
This is Kevin from my team, project manager for the project, and the surrounding. We also did the, it's not included here, but we also did the upgrade of the St Albans, the sports turf surfacing as well in conjunction with the new pavilion. The new pavilion is resilient. A lot of money was spent on piling to ensure that it's fit for future. It's got had a crime prevention through environmental design component to make sure that the toilets were very visible to the street in public. And it also is fully accessible compliant. So they're the key points. Take any questions?
All right. So
No.
just focusing in on the finances, the overall budget shows a $20,394 surplus after all transactions were completed, returned to the programme, which on the face of it, all good. But then we look at the fact that there was a budget change of $335,160, because the original budget didn't meet replacement requirements or community expectations, and the project at that stage was seen as currently unfunded. How did we get to a point where we needed to almost double the budget for this project? Was there something that became apparent as we went through the project, or was it seriously undercooked, or what happened, why we needed to almost double the budget partway through?
So quite often the budgets we inherit are put in advance. So we started with that, began an exploration exercise with the community, did some ground investigations, and then got to the point where we knew. So in hindsight, I guess, we would have had the budget set properly in the start before we inherited it through a line item. I don't know whether you want to talk to that at all.
There's some commentary in the report around, the project as originally planned didn't meet the community's expectations or the community's need. And I mean, I guess, it's possible that some of that only became apparent once we got to engagement with the community on the particular project. I guess from my point of view, it would be how we avoid, on the face of it, a $300,000 increase isn't a huge amount in terms of council's overall budget, but if there's potential for that to happen with this project, then there's potential for it to happen with others, which could have higher headline budgets, and therefore the impact could be far greater.
So the good news is this is a very old project. We opened it almost 2 years ago to the day.
Yep.
And we always have a lessons learned part in here, so we've taken on board all of that for future planning and any other toilet facilities or any other project we do as well. So my team have delivered several hundred projects over the last decade, I suppose, and we build on all of that institutional knowledge and findings to ensure that future budgets, when they're set, are fit for purpose.
Yeah, and this of course leads to confidence in figures that we're looking at for the capital programme in the LTP.
Very much so.
Because, if we're going to run a proper prioritisation process around project and costings, we need to know that those are accurate. So it's good to hear that every time something like this happens, that's then built into future processes to avoid repeats or to try to avoid repeats of that same
It's
thing.
a continuous improvement loop to make sure that when we start a project, we've got a greater degree of accuracy in terms of understanding what the total outturn cost would be.
Indeed. Thank you. Okay. Any questions on this report? Yanni.
Thanks. Just related to the question that's been made. In terms of the change request, did that come back in front of us at a governance level for approval?
That's dealt with via an internal management, so we take change requests through to ELT where they're reviewed and or endorsed or sent back through again. So
I find it really interesting. I think probably a lesson learned is we need to get some consistent process. We spend time in this chamber arguing about $10,000 or $20,000. We struggle to get things in terms of some local projects around resilience or sustainability for very small amounts of money compared to this. And I just wonder whether we need to think about if things are going to be changed, we make a formal resolution at this table, or we have some understanding of why we don't. But given what we hear through annual plan, where people are asking for much smaller amounts of money than this, for it just to be changed, I find kind of interesting.
So there must be a level of change at which it would require a council resolution.
Well, this is part of a program, and I guess that's been the agility of this program to deliver within an overall total agreed amount. So as we've heard previously through other reports, the surplus goes back in, and so we're managing the total program within a total outturn cost budget here. The number of change requests, I think, and Dave may know better, but the number of total change requests that transact through this organisation weekly and monthly would be a significant number, and they are dealt with via through the management structure.
Yeah, I don't think there's any suggestion that we should have the ability to make decisions on every one of those, because some of them will be very minor. This whole question of moving budgets around within programmes of work without governance involvement is something that has been talked about before, and it might be something that we need to pick up as part of the LTP discussions in terms of how the programmes of work are defined and ring-fenced, because some of those programmes of work are very large and very broad, and then we might want to pick up essentially the issue that Yanni has raised, which is at what level, at what quantum, or at what percentage of a budget possibly we might express it? Is there a desire for there to be governance involvement rather than it being simply a staff decision? So I think there are some, it certainly picks up some matters that have been raised previously, and the LTP is almost certainly the right place to begin to resolve them. But thanks for the answer to the question. Yanni, was there anything else?
I just didn't quite understand around the procurement and city care, but the contract valuation, quite a significant variation as well. In terms of like the actual budget and the amount that we spend on the contract versus all the other stuff, you know, I'm just looking through, so a contract of about 477,000 plus another 55, so 532. This is just on page 105.
Yeah.
Do we have a kind of some sort of benchmark around how much we spend non-contract? Like, I guess I'm just interested in why there's so much that's spent in the non-contracted part of the budget.
Fees as a percentage of construction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some market averages that we typically work to, and they'll be different for every project. This one, that's why we wanted to split it.
Yeah. This particular one had some different issues in terms of the stability of the site, which is why the previous facility failed. So, in terms of geotech and various other work to make the building resilient, there was probably a slightly higher cost up front.
We were essentially building on what someone referred to as a bowl of cold gravy.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you. Melanie.
Following on from what you said, Andrew, where in the LTP process would this come up? Because I'm looking at the schedule, and does it come under capital delivery, which is a 15-minute section on the 4th of November? I mean, how do you fit that?
We will need to build it into the programme. It's certainly a discussion that we want to have, and we'll need to build it into the programme.
I'd do that around when we do the prioritisation on capital. We can talk about the policy in that way.
All right. So Dawn's been making notes. It'll be picked up, but we'll certainly make sure we build it into the process. Aaron.
Yeah, just when I was looking at the this size, I was trying to get the square meterage, which was hard because when you blow up that thing, because it's a scan, it goes fuzzy. What was the square meterage of the building?
20 odd metres by 10, so it's close to 200 square metres, I think.
Approximately, we'll say approximately 200 square metres, and you're going to convert the total.
Big chunk of that's veranda space though, isn't it?
You're not going to see the square metre rate reflected because a lot of the money was spent, and you'll see in the ground. So this site being the bowl of cold gravy, a lot of those square metre costs were in the ground, not the above ground facility.
Right. So going forward, for everywhere else around the city, we've got to build in gravy. Should we not be coming up with a lightweight building design that kind of sits on top and
we took the advice.
Float your boat. Climate change, they can just keep rising.
Took the advice of the engineering on this, both geotech and structural, and this was a recommended solution. So that's what we went with.
Yeah, because it's
not rib raft. It's not slab on grade. This is the engineering solution that was specific to this site, and it's
the particular site with St Albans Park and the surrounding area. This building sitting on 36 piles down approximately 3 metres to 4 metres to a gravel layer. That's common for most of the residential housing all around that area. You'll find just about every residential house is sitting on a number of piles as well, almost to the same depth. There's a gravel layer around 3.5 metres deep.
So is that not over-engineering for a toilet block?
It's the only way of... the previous building failed. It's sunk anything up to about 300 mils at one end during the earthquake and broke the back or the floor of the building in half. There had been one in addition done to it previously that sat on some piles that basically stayed level, but the rest of the building dropped down. So when we looked at the construction of the slab to support the building, we looked at various options. One of them was to put a lighter weight foundation in that you could then come back later and jack the building up. That's proved to not be all that palatable in terms of if you jack the building up, then you've also got to change all your flooring and everything else inside. So the best outcome was to put it on the piles and know that we were down on solid bearing and know that we had the resilience in the building to see us through another event.
Right, another 300-year event. Right.
So it's quite
changing rooms.
It's quite clear from the answers to the questions that a number of options were considered. Engineering advice was sought and absolutely taken into account as we would want, and that resulted in this particular design. I don't think it's our job here to second guess the advice that might have come from the engineers, and I expect that we would want our staff in building any facility to take the advice of the engineers rather than doing something different.
Well, given that this is a finance committee, my fear is, Mr. Chair, with the sheer number of change facilities, toilet blocks, park facilities, halls and stuff across the city that we need and have to replace, that the pure cost of some of these now is just unaffordable. So we either have to slash back the sheer number we have or come up with other solutions for putting stuff in place, you know, and my ward's just as guilty. We're getting $1 million toilet. So, I mean, it's over $1 million, it's 1.2.
Yep. So I'm not even going to start.
I invite everyone to come and use it to get your money's worth. But
I won't even start talking about the price of some toilet blocks that were built in the past on Banks Peninsula. But yeah.
So we need better solutions. We just cannot afford to keep building these. And I realise in the timeline of things that this one's gone through, and that's fine. But going forward, we have to have better solutions. We cannot afford it.
So all of this needs to land as part of those LTP discussions, absolutely.
Or we end up with like 4 sports grounds with super facilities and none others, and you queue up to play.
Indeed. Sarah?
And we can just check and see actually how many there are left to go. Because the earthquake repair program, I think, is pretty much done.
It certainly is, yeah.
Yep, indeed. I mean, the other thing that you would take into account as part of what Aaron's talking about is location. Do we need to build back a facility in exactly the same place it was before, or is there some firmer ground that would support a different and possibly cheaper foundation solution, for example?
My point is, if we own 1,000 facilities and they have a 50-year life, you're doing 20 a year, and if the cost is 10 times what it was, 30 years ago, then.
And so that's a matter for the renewals programme and the LTP. You've certainly asked some questions on this particular project, which is the right thing to do as a closeout. You're raising some matters that we would quite rightly want to apply as we consider the renewals programme and how we do things for the LTP.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, they're not criticisms, they're asking questions so we got our house in order going forward, because they're learning lessons. That's what these are.
Constructive. Yep, absolutely. So Pauline and then Tim. Pauline.
Second it. It's a noting paper.
Okay, so Pauline moves and James seconds. And Tim, you've got a question?
Not so much a question, it's just following on from Aaron's. You've said that this is really at the end of the earthquake repairs, which is fantastic, and your team have done an outstanding job, I have to say. But the question raised by Aaron with regards to the ongoing cost if we are going to replace these venues. We've got communities that are being infilled, so therefore the parks have more pressure. So it's not about just earthquake repairs, it's also about how communities can look at these facilities and make them work. Yanni and I have been working with a community that have been wanting to put containers on to make it work. So I think there has to be a conversation at some stage about thinking outside the box.
So it's good that this report has given rise to a discussion that we can pick up as part of the LTP development. Well, the LTP development is in front of us and we've got every opportunity to do it. So it needs to be articulated at the right time in that process. All right, so this has been moved by Pauline and seconded by James. Is there any... Yanni, this is a further question? Discussion. Right, okay, so there is some discussion. Yanni.
Thank you. Look, I really appreciate getting these closeout reports. I do think there's a number of lessons that we can learn from these projects. I think probably one of the key takeaways from this one is project scope at the start and having proper QS rather than just having a line item in the budget. I appreciate it's a program of work, but I do think the point that Councillor Kewen's making through his questioning is really relevant. Like, if we're building a lot of these facilities, are we ensuring that we're getting a common approach to the cost, and can we do it in a more cost-effective way? But having said that, I just wanted to acknowledge your staff, Darren, you and your team, because we're coming up to 10 years from the first earthquake tomorrow. There's been a huge amount of community facilities that we have actually put back there's been hugely challenging issues with insurance, assessment, and a lot of aftershocks through that period as well. So I just wanted to personally just acknowledge the work of you and your team, and I think it's a fantastic thing when you reflect back to how many facilities we have had repaired or renewed for our city going forward. So thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Certainly adding to what Yanni has said, I remember as chair of the Communities Housing and Economic Development Committee in the 2013 term of council, seems a very long time ago now, we had a report used to come to us there, which was the Community Facilities Rebuild Programme, and that report used to take up a sizable part of our agenda. This was in the days of paper agendas, and it used to be significantly thick, and it was very detailed, and there were a lot of facilities that formed part of that programme, many of which were badly damaged, many of which were complex and complicated, many of which were also heritage facilities with particular complications as well. So it has been a huge programme of work. We saw that report get smaller and smaller through that particular term, and we've actually got to a position now where any further work has just been amalgamated with other programmes. But certainly echoing Yanni's points, it's been a huge amount of work been done, and I think has produced results which have exceeded community expectations in many cases. Certainly the outcomes for some of those heritage projects that I'm thinking of, some of those community facilities as well, the fact that we were able to save some of those and give them a new lease on life has been a real credit to the programme of work that you and the team have run and have been part of. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so now we move to items 13 and 14, both of which are statements of intent. So the first one is Transwaste Canterbury. So the statement of intent for Transwaste. Linda, have you got any comments that you need to make on this? We'll take this as read, obviously.
Sure. All I wanted to mention was that there is a joint committee that represents all the councils, and that committee is all the council owners, and that committee has delegated authority on the governance issues. So the SOI has been accepted, and I'm reporting it here to keep everybody informed.
Yeah, so we're just receiving it here. In fact, we're just noting the resolution. So Sam, you've moved this. I'm happy to second it. Is there any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. And now moving on to VBase. Linda, you're also presenting this one. Tim, we're noting your conflict. Any comments on this?
The SOI has been developed off the back of the workshop that the chair of the board and the chief executive came in and presented at on the 11th of August. Obviously, COVID has had a drastic impact on their expected outcomes, and the SOI was actually developed and received before the Auckland went into level 3 and we went up to level 2. And that at that time, I think it was the Women's World Cup cricket tournament was postponed. So in our report, we've noted that VBase's assumption of moving from 6 events to 13 major events between 2021 and 21-22 was probably ambitious. Those assumptions have fed up into a request for additional funding from council of $4 million per annum for the 2 out years. That's 21-22 and 22-23, with those what appears to be worsening, a worsening environment for them. I don't know where that number sits now, but that's what's in the SOI is $4 million from council in those 2 years. It might be worth noting here that of that $4 million, $1 million goes to debt servicing. $700,000 is what they have to pay for the stadium, to manage the temporary stadium, and insurance costs for the town hall and arena are $1.3 million, and there's nothing that they can do to reduce those costs.
So the figures there in the statement of intent, I think we can acknowledge that events is one area which has been particularly adversely affected by COVID, the lockdown, and the ongoing uncertainty around where COVID might affect things in future. So that $4 million figure, whilst that's there in the statement of intent, and we can acknowledge that it's there in the statement of intent, the actual decision making around that is part of our own long-term plan process. So by receiving this statement of intent today, we're not endorsing that budget, because that's part of what happens as part of the LTP decision making.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that's quite important to note.
Yeah, the key thing that the increases in out years 2 and 3, that this year is okay. It's there looking for problems in the out years going forward. So it's the 22 year and the 23 year in the SOI,
Yep.
which the first 2 years of the LTP.
And it may well be that as we develop the LTP and we put budgets on for this, we will require a greater level of certainty or a greater level of understanding around how these figures have been arrived at and whether in fact they are the right number before we agree to that as part of the LTP process. But that's a different matter than what we're considering today. All right. Further questions? Yanni.
Thank you. Just on page 137, you talk about the key opportunities lost to V-Base that adversely affect its profitability, including discounts provided to community groups using V-Base venues. But I just couldn't see the quantum in here that they were offering per year. Is there any reference to how much money they're making available to subsidise community use?
Yeah, the key thing on these subsidies, every time a community group comes to V-Base, they assess it for each individual event and the venue which they're in. So the town hall, which is a very expensive place to run, may have a different charging structure than the arena. So they do record it, but I don't think they specifically disclose it. But that's a question we can go back to V-Base management on and say, hey, look, can you provide us with that number? But it forms the community discounts. It used to be as high as $300,000 a year that we provide, and that's been dropping off because of the inability. That's not a sustainable number. But we can go back to them.
Some information, because when we were discussing the town hall, right from before it even was agreed to let V-Base operate it, we raised the concerns around community having access to it, given how much money we were putting in. So I think we do need to get actually a report on community usage of the town hall in particular. I mean, I appreciate there's other V-Base facilities, but in the past, you're absolutely right. We have been given a figure, and it's, love it or hate it, you can at least see what is proposed. In this one, I don't have any sense of how much corporate sponsorship they're giving away versus how much community discount.
On the performance targets on page 8 of the SOI, they have, instead of putting a dollar amount, because they never stuck to that dollar amount because they couldn't differentiate, they couldn't suddenly say to a community group, all of these other ones precedingly this year have had the discount, but we've hit our cap and nobody else's. So it would really be dependent on how many groups were looking for the discount. But they've put in here the number of events. So they've got 30 events this year to receive what they call the local cultural rate, and then 40 in the 2 out years. So that's good.
I still remember places like the chess competition, around this table. Remember when the chess people come in, and the local groups come in and say they can't afford the huge increase in rent that V-Base requires, and they can't afford the catering and all the other things that go with it. So, we can't change this now, can we? This is just giving us information. But can we actually have a note to get a report back or a memo back just around how community access to the new town hall has been working, and what the plans are going forward?
Yeah, I think it would be good to get something back. It certainly was a consideration when we made the bigger decisions around the town hall. It's something, we've always had an aspiration around having spent the funds in restoring the town hall, wanting it to be used as widely as possible and getting community use through there. And of course, yeah, that's the aspiration. It would be good to see how that's going, what challenges there might be, and that would then feed into any discussions around future statements of intent or future direction that we might want to give to VBase through a letter of expectation and so on in future. So if we can get that back, that would be good. Just in the form of a memo or a note would be fine. All right, thank you. Are there any further questions? All right, so can I have a mover for this one? Catherine, and seconded Mike. All right, so any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. So thank you very much indeed. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. But before we close, this is the last time that Carol Billette will be with us as our CFO. Carol is finishing, as I understand, at the end of this week, so I'd like to take the opportunity, Carol, for your support of this committee and of the finance team, and certainly some of the work that we've done in changing the thinking and changing the way that these reports come to the committee, that I'm sure all of us appreciate. We wish you all the best with whatever comes next. And thank you very much indeed for your support of the committee and all that you've done in the time that you've been here as part of the organisation. Thank you. So, Mike, I'll now call on you to close the meeting.
Te tapu o tātou kōrero, ka whakahokia ki te whare. No home year, hui e.
Tai kia.
Kia ora.
Thank you. So, what